Without further ado, let me introduce the presenters for today. We have Elizabeth Scott. She's a service coordinator for families at ASN. Patricia White is our family support services coordinator. And then we have Maria Villagran, our outreach coordinator. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. Remember to unmute yourselves.
Thank you, Stacy. Stacy Bell is our tech specialist and is always supporting us so nicely with technology needs. So we appreciate everyone being here today and your interest in our session. We're going to talk about the Community Employment Support, or CES Waiver Eligibility Determination process. So it has started for the first 600 individuals on the CES waiver wait list, which is also sometimes referred to a little more generically as the Medicaid waiver waitlist. This is an exciting time and also a challenging time for these members and their families. So when it's time for a waiver slot to open for an individual, the member has to complete a redetermination process so that the waiver office can be sure that they're still eligible for waiver services. Members may need support to complete the paperwork and to gather the required documentation. Next. So we hope you find the information that we're presenting today useful in your interaction with members you serve. We're going to talk about the purpose of CES waiver services, the components of the packet, documentation requirements to complete the process. We're also going to address some potential barriers to access of services and some ideas for supporting members and their families. The ideas and suggestions that we're going to talk about today are just that, ideas and suggestions based on what we observe in the community around this waiver redetermination process. So we know, we know each member and family has their own needs, their own story. Each professional or person that's supporting the members and families have their own work requirements and the logistics challenges that we're managing during the pandemic. So Stacy's already let us know that that link to the eligibility determination packet, the psych packet, is in the chat box, and so if you want to access that, you're certainly welcome to during the training. Most of the components of the packet are part of the initial CES waiver application process. So the information that we're talking about with you today can help you if you have a member that needs to apply for waiver for the first time. So hopefully, we hope that this is going to be kind of an ongoing support in the form of a recorded training. If you know someone who may be interested, needs the information, or if you want to refer back to it. So next.
Having CES waiver services mean that a person with developmental disabilities can receive support to live where they prefer instead in an institution, make life choices, get a job, express their own voice, and make connections and relationships. Waiver services help to provide independence to the member and to prevent them from being placed in an institution. Waiver support can give individuals the chance to participate in the community, make their own mark, and express themselves with their own voice. A person who qualifies for waiver may be able to receive extra benefit services like funding for equipment that is not covered by regular Medicaid. For example, a person who uses a wheelchair that is too heavy to transfer or to lift, they may find like a special stroller aids them to access more places and activities in the community. Or if the person qualifies, some home modifications may be provided to make bathrooms more accessible or to install a lift to increase mobility in the home. Next. CES waiver services are critical and can be available for a lifetime if needed. with a coordination and assistance as needed, individuals with disabilities and their families can get through the redetermination process and receive the support they need to access waiver services. It has been a long way for the families who apply for waiver services. Most of the individuals who receive a package were young children when the initial application was completed. This is something that families and their children with disability have been waiting on for many years, families who are tired and stressed. They have worked so hard to care for and support their children. Waiver services hold the potential for relief and hope that they can have help to support their children in their growth and independence. They have also waited for a chance to be able to work, rest, and give more support to their other children, or to do some things for their own health and well-being. Next. The CES Waiver team. This team is responsible for processing members' return package and documentation, as well as monitor timelines. The CES Waiver team works hard to request and process all documentation. Assisting with completing the forms is not part of their job responsibilities. They can answer questions and help guide supporters in the process. The pandemic has made it much more challenging for everyone, and we will encourage persistence, patience, and understanding when requesting information from the waiver office staff. Parents or members may need assistance to communicate with the waiver office if there are delays in gathering documentation. This will help to make sure their case is not closed. Next.
So this is the second mass opening of the CES waiver slots in recent years in Arkansas. So if a member is a part of the first, the 500 slots that opened with the tobacco settlement funds a couple of years ago, the paperwork is the same, but the funding source is different. So if a member is a part of those 500, then any questions that surround that need to be directed to the waiver office. So in October, the first 600 on the recent 600 people on the CES waiver list received a letter of notification letting them know that soon slots will be opening. And so here's the packet, and this is a list of the documentation that you need to start pulling together. And so it was not time yet to send paperwork in. The waiver office just tried to do that in order to give families and members more time. So now we're seeing, starting in January, that notification letters are arriving at homes. Not all of them yet, but slots are opening, and people are being advised that that it's time to turn in that documentation. And so in our division of Arkansas Support Network, the Family Support Program and Community Parent Resource Center, we've worked for many years to provide parents and self-advocates with information about how to navigate this process successfully. So the completion of these forms and gathering this documentation is one of the most challenging processes for families of individuals with disabilities. They may need significant support and follow-up to be able to access these critical, potentially lifelong services. So of course, the packets have arrived at families and members' homes during a pandemic. And so the logistics of basic everyday life for everyone is incredibly complicated already. So if there's a lack of response from the family, in most cases, it does not indicate a lack of interest, but most likely some sort of barrier. It could be that the family does not remember what the services are about, or understand what waiver services are. It could be that they lack the resources to complete the packet, or they have difficulty communicating with all the agencies that that are involved. They may have health issues, just feeling overwhelmed. Feelings of overwhelm may delay or stop the process. So we want to help keep that process moving to a successful outcome. So next. So we realize that documents on slides are not very legible. Our purpose in showing them is just to give you an impression of the image as we talk about the forms. Again, you've got the PDF for the psych eligibility determination packet in the chat box if you need it. You'll see that there are 20 working pages and 6 pages of instructions that go with the areas of need form, which we'll talk about shortly. We're going to go in order, just highlight a few selected pages to make sure that we work within our time frame today and respect your schedules. So this page is the first page of the eligibility determination packet, which sometimes is called the psych packet, and it's for the psychology team. So it provides this is a checklist of documents that are required, and super important, the address where the documentation all needs to be sent, needs to be mailed. So the CES Waiver Psychology team will review this information that's gathered together, and this is to determine if the member's developmental diagnosis and needs continue to make them eligible for waiver services. So now we're going to talk about the forms that are required to complete the packet. Next.
So one of the first forms that's in the packet is, we call it the DHS 703, which is the Evaluation of Medical Need Criteria form. And there's 3 pages to this form, and it's outlined, all 3 pages are outlined in a dark outline. And we're going to ask that you help the families fill out as much of this as you can. We suggest that the member or the families fill out the first 2.5 pages. It talks a lot about the individual themselves and what their needs are. In the kind of halfway down through the first page, there's a place to sign it for the family. But on the 3rd page is where the doctor needs to write an eligible diagnosis. We've seen a lot of these packets that have a diagnosis that may be a mental health diagnosis or medical diagnosis, which is not an eligible diagnosis. And we're going to go over some of those diagnoses on one of the other slides. But the doctor needs to write an eligible diagnosis. And the form needs to be signed by the doctor, not by somebody else in the office, but by the doctor. And then, of course, that form is current for 1 year. Okay, next. All right, so this is the first page. Like I said, it's outlined in that dark. And as you'll see up in the very top corner in tiny, tiny writing, it lists the eligibility criteria, lists the different diagnoses that are eligible, and there's a gray area in there. So making sure that the doctor sees that top corner is going to be important. This form is a little confusing because it has on their name of the nursing facility. Just ignore that. These forms are kind of a one form fits all. So these forms are used for a variety of different situations, such as entering an independent care facility or anything like that. They use the same form. So don't let that worry you. And then, like you see, halfway down the page, there's a place for either the guardian, the parent, or the individual themselves to sign it. Next. This is the second page. And it gets a little confusing because kind of down towards the bottom, it talks about behavior and attitude. And I've had families bring these to me where they mark one spot. Mark everything that pertains to that individual. I ask my husband, I don't have the same attitude every day. Ask my coworkers. I don't know. They may see me happy all the time. I don't know. Sometimes I'm happy. Sometimes I'm argumentative. Like I said, talk to my husband. Sometimes I'm cooperative. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm agitated. Lately, I've been forgetful. So mark everything that pertains to that individual because we're all different on different days. And then under mental status, it talks about confused. And I don't like the word confused. We need to be able to differentiate between confusion versus intellectual disability or just not having the intellect to understand the situation. So be very careful when you're marking that section. Next. Okay, so this is the page the second half of the page is where the doctor needs to sign it. So you'll see here listed what's considered by the Arkansas State Legislature as the qualifying diagnoses: cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, spina bifida, and other. Other is a gray area, which makes it kind of difficult sometimes to determine what's actually qualifies or not. Some people may have something like Rett syndrome. And within the diagnosis of Rett syndrome, you have cerebral palsy, seizure disorder, intellectual disability, and in some situations, some autistic behaviors. So while Rett syndrome is not necessarily listed in this list of qualifying diagnoses, it is still qualifying because it has the cerebral palsy and intellectual disability and seizures in there. One of the things that, and we'll talk about a little further on, that they look at is the functional adaptive behavior. How well can this individual care for themselves, which is a whole nother sector of what the psych team looks at when they're looking at these applications. One thing I'd like to talk about on this form is it states lists all durable medical equipment, and that gets a little confusing. What does that mean? That's like pull-ups, diapers, wipes, gloves, AFOs, braces, walkers, standers, anything else besides our human body needs to be listed there on what they're presently using. And you know, because that's something then that Medicaid could possibly continue to pay for, or that Medicare, the waiver could pay for. Okay, next. All right, some potential barriers that we have is, again, the parent may not understand what pages go to the doctor. And we recommend that you send all 3 of those pages to the doctor, even though the doctor only signs the last bottom part of the 3rd page. Send all 3 pages, because at the bottom of that 3rd page, it states that the doctor states that they have seen the entire application. And so I've had doctors refuse to sign it if they get just the 3rd page. So take all 3 pages. Sometimes what we find is that the parent either can't get the paperwork to the doctor's office, or they forget they've taken it and they can't go back and pick it up. Some doctors' offices, want you to bring it in. They don't particularly like email, so it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to follow up on getting that paperwork back. And as parents, we're kind of overwhelmed on all of this paperwork, and sometimes we forget what we've done with some of it. Did I take that to the doctor? I don't remember. And again, we mentioned the nursing facility, how confusing that is. So be sure that you assure whoever you're helping that it does not mean that you're entering them into an institution. And again, as I stated before, sometimes the doctor writes a diagnosis that is not a qualifiable diagnosis. And so we need to be very, very careful. I have gotten these applications that I've had to send back to the doctor to get the correct diagnosis, because DDS will deny it, and then or they will send it back stating this isn't a correct diagnosis, which then just makes the whole process even longer. Next. Okay, the personal history or money follows the person assessment form. Money follows the person means that the DHS money that comes with waiver goes with the person wherever they receive services. So that's kind of, if you receive services from one agency, if you move to another agency, that money follows with you. So this is a form that the family is required to fill out. It is 10 pages, a lot of information in there. It must be signed and dated. Again, if DDS gets something that is not signed, they're going to deny it or they're going to ship it back to you. So be sure that all the pages that need to be signed are signed. And we're going to ask if the family needs help or the individual needs help with this, please. Sometimes it may require walking through page by page by page, because it is a complicated 10-page. The whole form is complicated. So look through it. We're going to go through a few of the pages because some of them are a little bit more confusing than others. Next. So this is the first page of the 10 pages of personal information. And for the most part, except for the references to the nursing home, it's relatively easy. When it refers to the funding source down there about income, type, is it SSI or whatever? How much is it? Who is the individual? And that's the individual that you're filling this paperwork out for. Who is the rep payee? My child receives SSI, but I'm the rep payee. So, be sure to put that in. And again, if when you see the facility information, if they're not in a facility, don't worry about it. Next. Okay, so some of the barriers talks about the workers. Is this a place for the individual that you're filling out that you're filling it out for, or is it for whoever's filling it out? And in some places it talks about worker, and that would be a DDS worker, and so you don't have to worry about that. That's where they just fill that in. In the past, these forms have been around for a long time, and in the past, and still today, but in the past, most of these forms were filled out by an employee of DDS. Nowadays, not many of them are. And in fact, with this set of paperwork, DDS isn't going to help fill it out. So be careful about that. All right, the developmental milestone, we're going to go through these next pages, page by page, just so that you can get a better understanding of them. So we're going to talk about the developmental milestones, the inventory of community services, emotional and behavioral issues, and the community-based supports. So next. So I would get a lot of parents that would get stumped on this particular page, where on the bottom part where it says early childhood, talks about, when did the child sit alone, crawl, walk alone. If you're filling this out for an older individual, like Maria said, people have been on this waiting list for a long, 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 long time. So they, whoever's filling this out may not remember when their child sat alone. I don't remember when my child sat alone. I don't remember when he crawled. I do remember when he walked. I don't remember a lot of that stuff. So guess. If you don't want to guess, put a question mark in there and state, I don't remember. This area is not, you don't have to be exact. They're kind of just wanting to get an idea of, have these milestones been crossed? Is that individual able to walk? Are they able to speak? That sort of stuff. So it doesn't have to be precise, just kind of a ballpark figure, or I don't remember statement. All right, next. All right, the inventory of community service and supports needs. So this talks about where the individual is now and where they would like to be. What supports do they have now, and what supports are going to be needed to live as independently as possible? So, Maria talked about that the funding can cover some of this stuff. It mentions, a rolling shower. Perhaps that individual has a bathroom that's very, very difficult to get in and out of the bathtub. So perhaps something needs to happen to fix that bathroom so that it's more accessible for that individual. Or perhaps right now they're living with in their family home with their parents, and they want to be out on their own. That's where this is their chance to kind of dream. What do we have now? What do we need to live as independently as possible? So have that conversation. And some parents may say, oh, my child's never moving away. Yeah, my 28-year-old still lives with me. And that's okay, as long as the individual agrees with that. Get a kind of a consensus on that one. Understanding that it may change in the future. You never know. Next. Okay, this one is a tough one to fill out. Emotional and behavioral issues. I'm going to ask that when you're working with the individual to fill this out, that you be kind of careful how you ask these questions, because you want it to be honest, but at the same time, you don't want the individual to become depressed. Because it talks about poor judgment, impaired judgment, fearful, suicidal. You don't want to make that individual feel like they're not worthy or anything, or that you recognize that they may be suicidal. But so be very careful when filling this out, and address your questions carefully. And it's upsetting to family to have to fill this entire packet out, because you have to lay bare, if it's their child, you have to lay bare all the issues that child or that individual has. I know I have to do it all the time with my child. So it gets depressing sometimes to have to recognize my child cannot brush his teeth. My child does have some severe behavioral issues. My child does punch holes in the wall. My child does become aggressive from time to time. It's very upsetting to have to admit to that. So kind of tiptoe around this one if you can. But at the same time, you need to be honest, because whoever's receiving this packet needs to know what the resources are that this individual needs to be able to live as independently as possible. Next. Community-based supports. So this form is a form that, again, you want to be careful in filling this out, because DDS wants to know who in the community is there to help support this individual. Because if there are people in the community willing to help, then perhaps they will feel that this person doesn't need as much paid staff to come in. So when you're filling this out and you're talking to the family about it, or if you're the family filling this out, be very, very careful. Make sure that the individual that you're putting on it has the time and the energy to help the person. So if you're talking about Uncle Billy Bob, and if you wanted to put Uncle Billy Bob on here, make sure that Uncle Billy Bob has the time, the effort, and the knowledge on how to help take care of that individual before you put their name on here. Do you have any friends or neighbors who would be able to help if needed? Yeah, maybe on a rare basis, but you don't want to put somebody down there who works all the time and has children of their own that they have to go home and take care of. Also, it says, who is the main caregiver? Put that down. And how is this person's health? Be honest about that also. I say I'm in pretty good health, but unfortunately, not everybody's as healthy as I am. And so DDS wants to know how much additional support is that individual going to need, besides what you've got listed here as the community-based support. I was working with a family one time where the parent had cancer. And so both of her daughters were on this autism spectrum and required assistance 24 hours around the clock, because her condition, between her chemotherapy and everything like that, she just was not able to take care of them. And so, filling out this form correctly help them, find out what other people in the community can help, and then what additional support is needed. Okay, next. So I guess I just already talked about this. I keep doing that. I keep jumping ahead on this slide. So we've kind of already discussed this slide. And I did mention other people there that can step in case of an emergency. So again, be careful who you put down there. All right, Maria.
Okay, the DHHS 4000 authorization to disclose health information form. It is very important that the parent or member signs this form so that DDS can request documentation if they need it for eligibility. The information that DDS requests will be kept confidential. This can include medical, financial, educational, and psychological information. It is very important for families to understand this form. It has a lot of information, and sometimes parents may sign without understanding what they're signing. For example, the second page is for the purpose of revoking this consent and should not be signed if the person is giving their permission. The family or member, especially families who are English learners, may be confused and sign it, revoking the consent that they just granted. Next.
So now we're going to talk about the areas of need form. These are on this form, the waiver office wants to or ask questions about the limitations of the person with the disability, and this is going to be in several areas of functioning. There are 6 pages now of instructions that are included in addition to the forms. And also it's a date and a printed name of the person completing the form are required, but not a signature. And so that's a little bit different from some of the other forms. Next. So this is the first page of the 4-page form. So the different areas of need that are talked about are self-care, understanding and use of language, learning, mobility, self-direction, and the capacity for independent living. And answers to these, the questions in these areas helps the waiver team to understand the member's limitations in areas of daily life. What is the support that that person needs in order to function in daily life? So knowing this is going to help them to understand what support that person needs to actually participate in their life and to make decisions. So next. This is the first page of the instructions for the areas of need. These 6 pages are actually have been developed a little more currently than they were before and give a lot more information about what the waiver team would like to go on that 4-page form. The 6 pages do not have to be returned with the packet because these are just instructions for the member, their family, and the person that's supporting them to complete it. This is intended to just give a more detailed description of the content of each area that they want the family or the member to note. And it can be challenged. The reason for this, the length of these instructions is because it's very easy for families, or I would say it's difficult for families to understand the kinds of information that need to go into onto this form, and putting just a few brief statements or phrases is not really going to give a complete picture of the needs of this person. So this form is really important to get down to the basics of what is it on the ground, what does this person need in order to move forward in their lives, to be able to access the things that they need to be able to be successful in these areas of daily functioning. So next. And so when we talk about some potential barriers in completing this form, the first one that we wanted to mention is the professional terminology, which may be difficult for people who are not working in a social work profession, or for DHS, or maybe in a coordinator or support capacity. And families may not understand some of the wording, especially in the instructions. And we're talking about right now families who speak and read and write in English. It is even more difficult for families who need language access support to be able to understand what it is that they need to write down on this form. And just in addition as well, when a family who needs support with language access asks the help of another person, a family member maybe, or maybe an older child to help them with these forms, that person is most likely going to have difficulty helping to write down a narrative, because we're not talking about, you're filling out your name, your address, and some of those basic, personal details, but we're talking about more of a narrative description of what this person needs to be able to access their daily lives. And so it's really important to have support with this one. Another area that another potential barrier is something that alludes to what Patricia was talking about earlier, that parents and caregivers may underreport the individual's limitations because, as Patricia mentioned, it can be distressing to really look at the limitations that person may have and the assistance that the parent may be giving them, but also just in the daily routine. Our daily routines become automatic as we're trying to coordinate our home and our work and appointments and health issues and all the things that people in general deal with. And so, families who are giving additional support to a person may not realize all of the help that they give them because it's just automatic. They just do it without thinking. It's part of their routine. So that's a really important thing to consider. And in fact, an example that I have from recently is a family that I was talking to about this form, or actually a form off of the areas of need. And the chart asked the family to report the level of support that their child needs or that young person needs. And the family had marked just needs a little help all the way down the column, preparing meals, washing clothes, getting around from place to place, all these areas that we're talking about. And when I started to ask questions and say, well, okay, this young person is 17 years old. Is he able to use the stove? Can he get things out of the fridge, mix up a little something maybe? Not all 17-year-olds maybe to do that, maybe able to do that, but they've moved past the microwave, to be able to maybe prepare some things and safely use the stove or put ingredients together, to make something that they would enjoy eating. But in each area of this individual's life, as we talked, the parents were like, well, no, he's not able to. Oh no, we would never let him near the stove. No, he doesn't understand, how to look at a recipe or to put some things together that he would like to eat and serve himself. No, we give him lots of help with that. And as we went through the daily tasks, it became obvious to them that they were giving him lots of support that he needed in order to do those things, but that they weren't aware of. And so this is something that we can really, that people who are supporting can really help families and members to recognize. A question that can be helpful is, can that person do this activity 100% of the time without assistance or reminders? And remembering that we're talking about age appropriate. So a 4-year-old would not be expected to do as much independently as a 17-year-old, but to think about the age of that person and maybe a person who's typically developing and what additional supports this individual needs. And so if they're not able to do that 100% as they would be expected to, then that helps to guide you into questions about, well, what exactly do they need? What reminders do they need? And that's the information that needs to go on this form to help the waiver team to understand. Brushing teeth example, if a person, maybe a teenager that a member might not be able to brush their teeth, or the parent might say, oh yeah, she can brush her teeth. But does she have the hand coordination to take the cap off the toothpaste? Is she able to put the paste on the brush? Does she brush her teeth well enough to prevent cavities? Because an individual of her age would be expected to be able to do that, maybe with some reminders for all normal adolescents or typical adolescents. But to be able to kind of go into some of those details and find out what the real need is going to be. So next. A piece of documentation that the waiver unit is requesting with these packets is an updated psychological and psychoeducational evaluation report. So we'll talk about two groups of individuals, first adults and then children. The report needs to contain a measure of intelligence, or IQ, and a measure of functional adaptive behavior. Some examples of that might be a Vineland or an ABAS, or some other measure that would be approved by the waiver site team. It has to be current within 5 years, unless the testing was completed after age 22. And it's important to know that, because that testing may not need to be updated if the testing was given after the age of 22, then that assessment will work. However, the functional adaptive behavior measure still has to be within 5 years for that individual who was tested after the age of 22. So that measure may need to be updated. Next. So when we're talking about potential barriers for acquiring the psychological evaluation for adults, the family just may need help to understand whether a new evaluation is needed or not. People who have graduated from high school, but who didn't have an updated evaluation, before the age of 22 may need a new psychological evaluation. So we do know that some of the PASS companies are covering the cost of this evaluation for adults. And if you have questions about how to get that done or how to help with that, then the supervisor or someone in your company should be able to have a list of psychologists that would be in the network and to talk about how that can be done. So being able to determine if a new evaluation is needed is especially difficult for families who are English learners. If they're trying to review school documentation or reports written in English, then this is going to be a barrier for them. So next. So when we're talking about evaluations for children, the psychological, in the school setting, it'll be called the psychoeducational evaluation report. It's going to need to contain the same two measures, IQ and functional adaptive behavior. This is going to be for children 5 to 18, or if they're still in school until the age of 21 in that time, then this information can hopefully be asked from the school, and then that'll make things a little bit easier. So next, and we'll look at some barriers for families and members to try to get this information. So one of the main issues that happen in special education assessment, as we're relating it to the waiver determination process, is that school districts do a reevaluation every 3 years for children who receive special education. And this is part of IDEA and the special education law. However, they don't have to do a comprehensive evaluation every 3 years, say another IQ test, even another adaptive behavior test. This reevaluation is just to let them, just for the team to say, yeah, this child continues to be eligible for services in special education, and we're going to keep going. Here's the report. We looked over the last report. Everything looks good. They still need the services. So that puts the family in a position of maybe not having a current IQ test within 3 years. And so that's something that may be difficult for the family to determine, especially if they're not familiar with these kinds of reports, and especially if it's difficult to understand how the system works. Especially for families who use interpretation services and for language access in the schools, they will need to number one, understand what they're asking for and why, and then to try to explain this through an interpreter who may or may not be familiar with what they're asking for. So some things can really get lost in translation trying to get that information to the school. And so definitely coordinators and other supporters can be of great help in this situation. So a suggestion that we're going to also address a little bit later is that a coordinator could, or a supporter, who's helping with the packet, could request a copy of the psychological evaluation from the school district by email to see if it's current. And so that gives you a chance to just look at the eval and say, yeah, this was dated, within 3 years, and there's an IQ test and there's a functional adaptive behavior assessment. So looks like this is going to be good for the waiver determination packet. Or if not, then it's something that they're going to probably need some assistance to try to ask for, especially if they want to ask the school to do another evaluation or update the evaluation. It's not a small thing to ask of a school district because there's several people involved, and they have to get consent and have a meeting to sign paperwork. And so if the parent is not able to explain effectively what it is that they want and why, sometimes those requests get lost in the school district just because they haven't gotten to the right contact person who understands what they need. So coordinators and people who are supporting families in this can really be of assistance to help clarify that, so that the school district is like, okay, we understand what this is for, and yes, we'll be glad to do that and follow through with the process. So next.
Talking about additional documents for children's ages 5 to 18 or 21 if they still attend in a school, the families or assisting birthday care coordinators must also request the following special education documents from the school, like the evaluation programming decision form, existing data review, current notice of action, other therapy reports, like OT, PT, and speech or mental health reports as appropriate. These documents are listed on the initial checklist and are standard special education forms. The person's age will determine what documents is needed. For example, if a person is 21 or older, current therapy reports may not be available. Or like Elizabeth said, sometimes the school, for example, my daughter graduates from high school last year when she was 21 years old. And I was thinking that they did like a new evaluation report before she graduated school, but they didn't really do like a psychological report, a full report. They just did an addendum. And now that she has a waiver, but now that they request a new documentation, her career coordinator has to request to refer her to get like a new psychological evaluation. So that's why Elizabeth said, is really good for the person who is assisting the member to gather these documents, make sure that everything is current. Next. Potential barriers for additional special education documents. Families may have difficulty distinguishing between technical and special education documents if they have copies at home, regardless of home language. They may not know what documents they need to ask for or how to ask the school for what they need, particularly families who need interpreter services for language access. The special education teacher or assistant principal can help, or the district special services office if needed. In a little later in the presentation, we will be talking more about supporting families to gather these documents. Next.
So here's some ways that other people can help support families and individuals on these packets. Of course, first of all, particularly with COVID, safety first. We don't expect you to go to the house and sit down around the kitchen table and help fill this out. We want everybody to be safe. So keep that in mind. You know, it may be, you know, you can mail the information or, you know, hand it over somehow, but you can work that out with the individuals. But find out how much support each individual or the members need, because some individuals are going to need more support than others. I've been working with a family that the mom she's filled out most of the paperwork herself. She's just called me to get information on a couple of little pieces of the packet, and she's got the rest of it done. I've had other families who will, when we were doing it and we were doing it in person, I would say, fill out as much as you can and then come see me. And they would come in and the packet would have the individual's name on it. That was all they could fill out. And I had to fill out the rest of it, help them fill out the rest of it, which I realize is hours long. So find out how much assistance is needed. And also make sure that you're filling out the correct paperwork, because since we're doing a lot of this by phone, the parent or the member may be talking about one form and you may be talking another one. So a cute little tip here is to ask the family to take a picture of it and text it to you to make sure you're talking about the same form, so that you're not at crosshairs at what's actually going on. And check with the family to find out what is the best method of communication. I know I have 2 care coordinators. I have 2 adults in my home with special needs, so I'm dealing with 2 different coordinators, and they've asked me what is the best way to contact me, and I really appreciate that. And so find out, because not everybody uses email. Some people prefer snail mail. You know, some people phone, some people can do virtual. So find out what's the best way of doing this. We recommend that you actually have a blank copy of the paperwork, which is why we've listed it in our chat box here. And, you know, we can email a blank copy to you, or you can get a blank copy from your PASS office so that you can look at it and know what you're talking about. And then you can actually, if you need to actually hand write it out, because not everybody's very good at writing. Not everybody's very good at understanding how to write the correct thing. There have been many times when I've actually had to fill the packet out myself for somebody. So it's good to have a blank copy so that you can do that and work with them over the phone or however you need to do to fill out the papers. And then you can mark, you know, where the individual needs to sign, you know, highlight it, cross it, put little sticky arrows, however you want to do it, and then get it to that individual, again, in whatever method works best for you, so that they can get the paperwork signed. Because again, if it's not signed, it's going to bump back and either be denied, or it's going to take a lot longer to get it, you know, accepted. Next. All right. So one thing that you need to do is keep the paperwork together. So you've got a lot of different sections. You've got the actual application itself with all the different sections in it. Because remember, 3 pages went to the doctor. So you've got to make sure that those 3 pages come back. Then you've got the evaluations, and you've got the application and the rest of the stuff, and any evaluations. So you may be dealing with getting evaluations from school. If the individual is an adult and they're not in school anymore, you may be getting paperwork from this therapist, paperwork from that doctor, paperwork from this place. So make sure who's determined with the family who's going to keep all this paperwork together, because you want it to stay together. You want to make sure that the evaluations are current within the dates that we talked about and signed. Again, if it's not signed, it's going to bump back. Check with the family to make sure they know how to request the documents. Maria talked about that. You can help them. The schools in our area have been really, really good at getting documents to the family or to whoever is making the request. Make sure that the 703 is signed by the family and the doctor, and that the 703, and that's that medical needs form, is filled out correctly with the correct diagnosis on it. Make sure everything's signed where it's marked, and make sure that whoever's mailing, finally, once the time comes, because you're hanging on to it for a while, but when the time finally comes, make sure that whoever's mailing it has the correct address to mail it to. Because if you mail it to the wrong place, it's a black hole, it's gone. Don't know where that disappeared to. Next. Oh, this is my phrase. Make a copy of it. Document, document, document. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. I've got lots of different ways of saying it, but always make a copy of everything that's being sent in, because if for some reason it lands in a black hole somewhere, you know, DDS may say, well, we never received it. You've got a copy of it, so you don't have to start all over again from scratch, because you don't want to. It's a lot of paperwork to fill out. You don't want to do that. So make a copy of everything, even the evaluations. And then again, hang with that family until the paperwork is sent in. If it's the family member, the family, or the individual, whoever is mailing everything in, stick with them. If the care coordinator is the one mailing it in, fine. Keep in touch with the family to let them know when you're going to mail it in. But make sure you mail it all in and at the time that it's being requested. Next.
Now we're going to talk about suggestion for supporting families who need interpreter services. Often emails is not an effective communication mode. Many Hispanic families do not have email addresses, or they do not know how to use them. Using a blank copy of the waiver packet in English, complete the application, the packet with the family or on the phone, assisted by interpreter. It works best for the coordinator or person supporting to complete the application in English to make sure that the correct information is on the forms. Coordinators often have access to members' medical and other information that they can be helpful in completing the waiver package. Like Patricia said on the form 703, make sure that highlight the diagnosis section for the physician and clip the 3 pages together so the family will know what to take to the doctor. The doctor only is going to accept this form fax or delivered by in person. And I have the example of my daughter's care coordinator. She wanted to email this form to the doctor, and I suggest to her, probably it's not going to happen. I worked for 11 years for a therapy clinic, and I don't know any clinic that they receive emails for the safety or the HIPAA. And then even clinics that they only accept these papers in person or by regular mail. So she tried it and she was not able to do it. So she finally found a way that her PAS was able to fax this form to the doctor. And then it could be like one of the forms that you can fax it to the doctor, and then the parent can pick up this when it's ready. Next. Oh, sorry, can you go back? It used to make sure that mark where all the forms should be signed, and mail the packet back to the family and signed to keep it in a safe place when it's time to send. Like Patricia say, when it's time to have all the paperwork together, so you must make sure who is going to keep it, if the care coordinator or the family. Next. Suggestions for supporting families who need interpreter services. Especially when gathering school documentation, we suggest that to text to the family the names of the exact school documents needed and the purpose. So sometimes the family, even if they don't understand English, they can go to the office and show the text to the person who are requesting. Because most likely the family will not be familiar with the documents needed. Make sure they understand exactly what to ask for. And like I say, a text from the care coordinator can help with this. The family can make the request at the school or a special service office and pick up these copies. If the care coordinator finds it easier to request the documents by email, like Elizabeth, it will be also beneficial. Or if they have a printer, they can print these papers and add it to the packet. So we know that working from home does not always make this possible. The waiver office can accept email school documents, so this might be an option when it is time to send in the completed packet. This will also give the coordinator a chance to review the psychological evaluation and other school documents to see if they are up to date. Next. Talking about potential barriers by assisting families who need language interpretation support. The waiver redetermination packet in Spanish. We have talked about how families and members who speak and write in English may have difficulty with completing the packet and gathering documentation without some support. So it's the same for the families who speak Spanish. Who will assist the family if they are not able to complete it, and how? Families who speak and write in Spanish to try to complete the Spanish form, they may have many questions and need support, even if it is in their language. The DHS 703 form in the Spanish packet is in Spanish. So the doctor will not gonna sign a form in Spanish. So it's gonna be really hard to take this form to the doctor, and doctor is not gonna be able to sign because he's not gonna be understand what he's gonna sign for. Even though the packet is offered in Spanish, for example, families whose native language is Spanish will not even have greater challenge with terminology, and some words do not translate well from one language to another one. There's no one at the DDS that they can call that can assist to complete this package in Spanish. The family then calls the care coordinator who may not be able to assist with the packet in Spanish. This causes difficulty and stress for everyone. DDS provides translation if the forms are returned, but only if the family can complete it and return to them. Even if a family is able to complete the packet in Spanish, it will need to be back translated to English when it arrives at the waiver office. Though this service is offered by DDS and available, it will take additional time for processing, potentially delaying services. Navigating the school special education system and the medical system to request documents causes additional barriers for families and members working to access these services. Next. The waiver team, Department of Human Services, here we have the contact information. Our mission is to make sure the family and members get all correct documentation to this office when requested, and that they can communicate with the waiver office as needed. The family and member waiver team and PASS team, as well as other supporters, can work together to help the member access all the services available to them. If the member is on the waiting list, but it is not yet time for services, it is important to help the member to check with the waiver office at least once a year to make sure that all the members' contact information is up to date. Next.
So the CES Waiver Office will send a letter to the family announcing that a slot is open. As we've talked about earlier, that has already begun to happen. This starts a timeline, and this is a very important thing to be aware of because there's going to be a date on that letter. The family must send in all that documentation in the packet by the date on the letter or ask for an extension. And so most So following up with the family and with the waiver office is going to be so important, because little pieces sometimes can fall out, and then it can stop the process. And so what we want is, as we mentioned at the beginning, is a successful end to this, to get people and get the members the services that they qualify for. And so just to, perspective on the asking for an extension, most parents and members, regardless of their home language, will not know to request an extension, and they won't know how to do it if they are aware of that tool. It's done by writing to the waiver office to make the request. It can be done in the form of an email. And as both Maria and Patricia mentioned, email is not always the best mode for families, or a workable mode for families who just really don't understand the technology of it, or just don't have access to the virtual world right now. And so that's something that is easy to do to support a family or member, is to send an email to the waiver office requesting an extension. So that especially families and members who do not speak, read, or write in English, they're not going to, as Maria mentioned, they're not going to have a DHS resource to directly contact the waiver office and ask for that extension, or even to ask for information about how to do so. So that's going to be something that we want to prevent happening, and is a huge barrier of just running out of time and not knowing how to ask for that extension. So that's something that the families really can receive some good support to be able to keep that going. So next. Just briefly, I just came up with the analogy of the waiver package. It's just kind of like herding cats. You get everything in and you think you did it, and then the letter comes and there's something missing, and then there's a signature missing, and then there's another signature missing, or there's a date missing, or it is just like herding cats. And so that's why, again, as we've mentioned, that follow-up is so important. The family, if there's something missing from the packet, the family's going to get a letter, and it's going to say, you have such and such till such and such a date to get the rest of this information in. So we suggest that you keep the family talking to you. Let them know, hey, you get a letter, you don't know what it means, text me a photo of it and let me see what it is that you've gotten. And then it can be pretty easy to fill that gap, get that little missing bit, or help the family to get the document or something that may have slipped through the cracks. There may be a date, an evaluation, that's out of date, or something that you missed. It's really easy to miss things. So it's even easier for families and members to miss it because of just kind of the layers of details. So again, if that doesn't reach the waiver office by the due date, then an extension is going to be needed, or there's a risk of closing the case. So just the concept of keeping that moving is really, really an important thing to keep in mind, and so that they can reach that successful end of being able to access any services that they're eligible for. Next. So as we're ending here, we are not going to go through the next packet that's going to come through, especially coordinators who may be already pretty aware of the Medicaid eligibility packet. This will be a second packet that, after all of this has been turned in to the psychology team for the first eligibility packet. Then the waiver office is going to send a second one, and it's going to send that Medicaid eligibility packet. And so you'll see in the chat, Stacy has posted that for you, so that you can have that in your pocket as well. So it doesn't require as much gathering of documentation, and a lot of it addresses the financials and assets of the member. not necessarily the family if the member is already an adult. The forms are complex and difficult to understand for families and members. So, and especially families who are needing to access interpreter services. As far as I know, this packet is not available in Spanish. And that is something, you know, that we have definitely wanted to address here, is the lack of accessibility to support when the forms are in Spanish. And so we really want to encourage that completing of the English packet. And we did have a good suggestion before I continue. We're just going to finish up with this last couple of slides, but one of our attendees last session suggested the Spanish packet as a reference document for the family. As they're completing the packet on the phone, the family can kind of help themselves to understand a little bit more by looking at that. So if that's something that would be interesting, you know, as a reference, we're going to include that as a follow-up to the training, a copy of that, a link to that, the Spanish packet that the waiver unit has released. Just as an extra detail, that the Spanish packet is not fully updated as far as the translation goes. And so again, it really, we would suggest it more as a reference as opposed to someone trying to complete that, because it can be quite challenging. So the first page of this Medicaid eligibility packet is just going to be the checklist as in the first packet. And next. And the first form is going to be the long-term services and supports application. And this is as far as we're going to go with that packet, because like I said, you all may be familiar with it, and it's something that's going to come next. We fully expect that the families and members that needed full support or partial support on this first packet are going to need a good deal of assistance on the second one and ongoing. So next, and we'll turn it over to Patricia.
I'm wondering how many times we have heard the statement, make sure everything is signed and dated. Wow, I've heard it multiple times, must be important. So we've talked about there are going to be more forms that are coming, and some of these forms are, again, to determine if the person is eligible, but a lot of it is to determine what type of needs that individual has. What type of services are they going to need? Are they going to need therapy? Are they going to need the equipment that Maria was talking about? What provider are they going to want to choose? There's about a dozen different providers just in Northwest Arkansas. And so the individual has to choose a provider, and they usually send out a list of all the providers. And unless you have one already picked out, I would suggest calling around and finding out which provider works best for you, because they all do things a little differently. You look at, what times of day do you need assistance? What do you want that individual to do? There's so many additional decisions that need to be made. And so we're asking you as care coordinators or whoever's helping the family to help walk them through those additional services so that they can have a better understanding of what they need and how to make that request. Next. So as it states on this slide, we really appreciate everybody who is helping these families. We've been doing it for years. We know that a lot of other people have been helping these families. We know it's a lot of work that goes into these packets, but the outcome can be tremendous for the individual receiving services. It means that they can live as independently as possible, which for a lot of people means a whole lot. So thank you for all your help, and let us know if we can be of any support. Stacy?
Yes, thank you guys so much. We're going to answer just a couple of questions that we got. And if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll talk about it. But for those of you that need to go, I just wanted to thank you again. And then also don't forget, as soon as you exit in your browser, you'll be seeing that 3-question survey that we very much so appreciate you filling out. It should be relatively painless. And if you don't get a chance to fill it out then, we're also going to email it to you. So thank you so much for that. All right, so for the couple of questions we got, I'm going to also paste them in the chat to you, but I'm going to read them out loud as well. What do you recommend putting in the early childhood developmental profile for members that were adopted later in life and this information is not available?
I have come across that, and I state on that page, and you can write anywhere on that page that you want. You don't have to just fill in the tiny little lines that they give you, but you can write in there that individual was adopted at such and such age, and there is little information about that. I've done that.
Awesome. And then the other question we got was here. If an adult lives in an ICF and comes off waiver, how long can they stay at ICF while on waiver? She said the provider said they can't stay at ICF if they have waiver. And then she has a member who is on a wait list for an apartment, but otherwise there just isn't any housing available in this area.
Wow, that's an excellent question. I don't have an answer for that. Elizabeth, Maria, do you have an answer for that?
You know, I don't, and I think that's something that we could, if we have your email, we would be glad to check into. We definitely have people that we can talk to about that. If you could maybe communicate that to Stacy and make sure that we've got your contact, we'd be very glad to talk with someone and get you an answer to that question.
That sounds like a Regina question.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions there. So we're already nearing 3:30 here. We can hang on for just a minute if anyone else has any questions, but like you see on the screen, we have all of our emails there, our phone number. We are not hard to find. So we aren't working in the office right now. We're out and we're, for safety reasons, out working from home and traveling. So, but you can always get in touch with us at the contact info listed here. And if we can do anything to help, we're more than happy to. So. Like I said, we'll hang on for a couple minutes, but we do thank you all so much for attending our training.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.